following David Swanson and talking about peace, tall order. Let me begin though by, and John had mentioned that it'd been several years since I've been here, too long I would say. These things are absolutely important, these kind of gatherings, annual, quarterly, weekly meetings of peace friends and colleagues to refresh and recharge, to make new friends, to build solidarity with old ones. We're all we have, right? This is not a culture that's friendly to peace or any of the other progressive causes that we've talked about. And I'm talking about the sort of, official culture projected to us in the media. We have to build our own, knit together that series of subcultures that Jill was recommending need to converge before change happens. And I think that's absolutely right. Another point she made this morning had to do with the importance of students and youth. I'm in the business of teaching some segment of them. It's quite striking. Every year I get a year older and they stay the same age. But I notice they're not here today, right? And they're usually not here, especially kind of, it's interesting, peace, anti-war efforts, except at the hottest sort of moments. They'll turn out for a big demonstration. It's a challenge to us. I want to return to this theme in some of the other workshops this morning. One of the things really that we need to do, those of us with gray hair or none at all, need to reproduce and replace ourselves. We're not going to be here forever, and so who's going to carry on this work after we're gone? Thus far, I think that's an open question. Both Jill and David touched on the point of the popularity of progressive policies. It's made clear every time there's any kind of genuine, open, and honest public opinion poll on these matters. You ask Americans what they want to do about any of the problems that have been discussed so far this morning and things we'll hear this afternoon, and it's exactly what the people here today would like to see happen, right? So we have this extraordinary contradiction between what people want. We live in an alleged democracy that clearly is so sick on its deathbed, even then I'd argue, such that it's not able to deliver. Another fundamental conundrum before us. David was talking about war as kind of the center of all evils, and I think he's right. And yet, in America, of course, there's even a prior problem, right? That was touched on. I think you'd agree with me, which is the importance of money in politics, right? Were we to live in a genuine democracy, in other words, one which was not dominated by money, we'd be able to make all those sort of reforms in our foreign policy, in the Defense Department regarding spending and so-called humanitarian interventions, such that we no longer be the largest purveyor of violence on the planet. David mentioned too that we need to push the proposition that bombing is absurd. As you likely know, most of the rest of the world thinks bombing is absurd. It's our country that has this knee-jerk tendency to want to bomb its way out of trouble, which of course, again, as this audience knows, but I'll tell you again anyway, just creates deeper trouble. I've looked closely at so-called humanitarian interventions, wrote a paper on Lebanon, on Somalia, and on Serbia, Kosovo. In each one of those three cases, there's no grounds for the United States to be able to claim that they saved lives or prevented genocide or fed hungry people. In each of those three cases, U.S. foreign policy took a side, tended to be the wrong side, if there was any side to be taken at all, exacerbated the problem, and each of those three places today remains as approximately as big a mess as it did prior to the so-called humanitarian intervention. So that's right, the last thing Iraq or Kurdistan or Syria needs is U.S. bombs, missiles, or troops. Those are not the answer. Whatever the question is, military violence is not the answer. And yet, the problem before us, as posed by the wonderful phrase you see from Buckminster Fuller, who a futurist, had his heyday in the 40s and 50s in this country, with whom I think you're familiar. When it comes to peace, it's absolutely the toughest one. We'll talk about some of these other paradigm shifts that I think, relatively speaking, are easy compared to that with peace. So again, in order to change an existing paradigm, you do not struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete. Well, that, again, you know, we'll talk about the environment, we'll talk about climate change, we'll talk about building a sustainable world. I think that holds. It's very clear. I think he's right. You don't do it within the system, you build another one. When it comes to matters of war and peace, it's much tougher, as you know. We have a number of grassroots and other sorts of initiatives that are attempting to solve conflicts nonviolently, right? You all understand that conflict is inevitable, of course. Violence, however, is not. Right? We know how to resolve conflicts without violence. And yet, now back up to the level at which foreign and defense policy is made, trying to build a parallel model to that, some kind of stepping out of it, dropping out, is hard to imagine, right? How do we, and so again, a challenge to us this morning, how do we develop a parallel system that made foreign or defense policy? Okay, we can have shadow governments, as Jill and David mentioned. We can suggest alternative policies, we can critique existing policies. That's relatively easy and straightforward. But how do we do, you know, how is ever person-to-person diplomacy or exchanges or discussions outside of official channels, how is that going to replace the war system? Right? Not an easy question. Is it just a matter of scaling up these kind of neat grassroots and other initiatives that we've been working on for decades? Hard to say, but yet another challenge before us today. Joe mentioned GMOs too. It's quite extraordinary. There are 64 countries in the world that require the labeling of GMOs. Right? Each and every one of those is a market for U.S. food producers, mostly the big giant ones. U.S. food is sold in each and every one of those markets, including GMO food, and thus is labeled. In other words, quite easy to do. I've seen these things in some of these countries that require labeling myself, and yet interesting, as you know, not something that the food industry says is possible in our own country. That's another nice little snapshot of the problem before us, right? Can be done, is being done, somehow impossible, we're told, by the powers that be, that we can do this in our own country. You and I know better, and I look forward to discussing these matters with you further this morning and into the afternoon. Thank you.